Good morning. Looks like we have everybody now with us that's going to be mostly with us. So I'm Mark Benthian, Executive Director for Earthquake Country Alliance. I'm also at the Southern California Earthquake Center at USC, where I lead our Communication, Education, and Outreach Department. I'm joined by Sharon Sandow, also at USC, and with Earthquake Country Alliance, our Deputy Director, who's going to be facilitating the Q&A and chat, and others who I'll be introducing in a moment. So just if you're new to ECA, we are a statewide coalition of public, private, and grassroots leaders. Hopefully you find yourself somewhere in there with a government organization or a private business or nonprofit, or maybe you're a CERT member or other just interested person in this topic. We do have statewide committees and alliances across the state, and we get our support from Cal OAS, and we really encourage you, if you aren't a member, to join us for free at earthquakecountry.org/join. We are supported by funding from the National Earthquake Hazards Reduction Program, both through Cal OAS and FEMA, as well as the National Science Foundation and U.S. Geological Survey. So it really bringing all these agencies together and groups like ours to help reduce earthquake risk and improve resiliency. Our statewide activities include our websites at earthquakecountry.org and terremotos.org in Spanish. We just had California 2023 Tsunami Preparedness Week a couple weeks ago. So you can learn more about tsunami preparedness and activities and register what you're doing this year, any day of the year, at tsunamizone.org. Similar to Shakeout, of course, coming up in October, this year, October 19th, always the third Thursday. And we coordinate that as well and created the Shakeout back in 2008. And you can find other webinars and events at earthquakecountry.org/calendar. These are some of the committees that are organized in that we coordinate for different sectors. We have subject matter experts with each of these groups, and we encourage you to join us. Today's webinar is coordinated by our public sector committee to share innovative community engagement activities that are largely organized by public sector organizations for their communities and others. So learn more about these at earthquakecountry.org/committees. We do have outreach bureaus too that you can participate in. In particular, I want to mention our events bureau, and that if you have a request for a in-person or online, like a Zoom presentation, a speaker for an event, or an information table, you can go to earthquakecountry.org/events to complete our form to submit your request. You're a longtime ECA member. You're very familiar with our 7 steps to earthquake safety, which most of our documents and messaging are based around. We have information for each of these steps on the website really extensively, and other resources that are in a more summary form. And today you could say is something around step 2, plan to be safe, or taking trainings and learning and getting ready and making your plans. We also have that information now in 15 languages, actually 16 versions, since we have 2 written scripts for Chinese. And you can find all of these documents at earthquakecountry.org/languages. So let's begin today's webinar, our community engagement webinar number 6. And I'm going to introduce the chair of ECA's Public Sector Committee, Crisanta Gonzalez, Division Chief for the Community Preparedness and Engagement Department with the City of Los Angeles Emergency Management Department. Crisanta.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. We're really excited to have you all here with us. Again, as Mark mentioned, my name is Crisanta Gonzalez, and I am the Division Chief for the City of Los Angeles Emergency Management Department, and I am over the Community Preparedness and Engagement Division. So I would welcome you to check out our website at readyla.org. But today we are going to be going into our new webinar. But if you'd like to visit or view any of our past webinars, please go to earthquakecountry.org /community. And as you can see on the screen, you're able to view any one of our former 5 webinars. We have some great information there on any one of these topics that you can go back and watch again. So we're looking forward to today's webinar, where we're going to hear from another great topic. It's called, we have 2 guest speakers today that are presenting. And so on today's agenda, we're going to hear about Prepare You. So we're excited to hear from Lars Eric and Ron about their program called Prepare You. We're also going to have a Q&A afterwards, and then an open discussion. So with that, I want to turn it over to our presenters and thank them for being here and thank them for taking their time to present this excellent program. And we hope that you will really enjoy this program and really find the benefits of it and find interesting, just as we did our former 5 webinars, and find some really valuable points for your community and see how adaptable and how unique this program is. We're really excited to share it with you. And as always, if you have other ideas or other programs that you have found in communities that you've heard of, please reach out to myself or Sharon or Mark and share that with us so that we can also bring those people in and share it with all of our communities so we can all learn about different community engagement and public programs available. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our presenters. Thank you all.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
So we're going to go ahead and do a quick introduction of ourselves just to give you guys some background. So we're going to be talking about Prepare You in this history, format, and future. But if we could go ahead and click on the next slide, please. So we always like to kind of start with some introductions. And this is how we like to introduce ourselves to our students when we start these sessions off. So we like to basically get personal, let people know who they're dealing with, basically, right? So a little bit about me. My first name is actually Lars Eric. It's kind of like Joe Bob, but Swedish. And I grew up in Alaska. And the village I lived at, there's actually a word which literally translates as always getting ready. So even as a kid, I was kind of involved in preparedness. A bit more about my background, I'll go into a little quicker than I sometimes would, is I used to work for a company that made backup software. If anybody's ever lost data, you know that using data can be a disaster. I worked for collaborating agencies responding to disasters using a curriculum. We'll talk more about that a bit. And I'm currently using CARD's curriculum as I work for Eden I&R. We are the 211 for Alameda County. Basically, not to put too fine a point. Oh, also, next slide, please. I am the chair, and Ron is the co-chair of ALCO VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters. So basically, next slide. I'm kind of a nerd about this topic. I like using the Gary Larson mug because it seems like a disaster. So that's a bit about me.
And about me, it's like really quick. My real name is Ronaldo Agustin Kataga Halog, but so many people can't do the roll of the R, so I just call it by Ron. It makes it a lot easier. And I grew up in a small little town in California, and we had lots of animals, farm animals, but I love this guy, Tigger. And so even to the point when I got married, I had a 4-foot Tigger at my wedding, which is funny. It's people are like, Ron, why? It's like, because he's got energy. That's one. Number two, and he's passionate, but then he always seems to bounce all over the place. So that's one thing I really love. And then a little bit about me. It's I come from lifeguarding way back when I was really, really younger. Basically, I was with Seal Beach down in Southern California, working at the beach. From there, I became an instructor for the American Red Cross down in Southern California. Then when I moved up here, I became one of their corporate instructors. And now I'm working with the Independent Living Center resources of Solano and Contra, Costa County, where we're helping people out during wildfires, power outages, you name it, any kind of disasters where the power goes out, we're handing out batteries. And so it's something that, we're definitely trying to get more people prepared. Next slide, please. And so a little bit about my background again. I'm vice chair with Lars Eric at ALCO VOAD. I'm also a FAST team member, that's Functional Assessment Service team member, helping out people in shelters with Alameda County, and also a CERT member for the city of Hayward. So I've got little hats going on, as I know that all of you do as well. Next slide. And here's the thing, you know, when Lars Eric and I started teaching, it's like we had this mutual understanding that preparedness doesn't have to be scary, but it can be fun. It can be exciting. And so the way we actually took this on was not more of scare tactics, but make it fun, because we found out that people tend to do things that are enjoyable instead of doing things that they hate. So I think that comes to part of the success of where we're going with Prepare You. Next slide, please. Lars Eric?
So the reason we like to do this is because, you know, it's not so much that we like talking about ourselves, but I found that as we're doing this, it's really important, I think, to get people engaged early on. And for personal preparedness, we like to make it personal. So I've been doing this a lot recently for my trainings at some senior centers that I'm doing, basically helping people think about their backgrounds, about their experiences, their hobbies and their own passions. So making personal preparedness personal can be just a really, really useful step. And that's kind of a taste of our approach on how Prepare You works. That being said, let's talk a little bit about how this whole thing got started, you know, what it is and how it got started. So what's the background? What's the motivation? What's the history of all of this? So go ahead and click. This actually started because we were approached by BUASI, the BAUASI. And that stands for, if you click, it'll expand the acronym, because I always like to expand acronyms, the Bay Area Urban Area Security Initiative. And that covers basically 12 counties in the Bay Area. Alameda and Contra Costa County are the East Hub, and that's the hub that Ron and I were approached to cover for this project that they were doing. There are the 3 other hubs. There's the West Hub, San Francisco, San Mateo. There's also the next hub, North Hub, which covers, as you can see, 4 counties, Marin, Napa, Solano, and Sonoma. And then the other hub is, of course, the South Hub, which it covers Monterey, San Benito, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz. So different organizations covered the hubs, but BUASI didn't want to do this county by county. They didn't want to have it that broken up. They wanted to cover this in 4 main areas. So they reached out to different organizations to cover those hubs. Go ahead. So that's just kind of about the background. So when they approached us, they basically had an outline that basically talked about the key points they wanted to have covered for all the trainings. In each of the 4 hubs, it had topics that they wanted to have covered, how many hours of instruction they wanted to have for each of those. And it really turned out that most folks, the key point was, these are the points that you want you to cover, but use your own curriculum to cover those. So earlier I mentioned I used to work for an agency called CARD, Collaborating Agencies Responding to Disasters. I inherited a very engaged curriculum, which we're going to talk about near the end of this presentation, that I adapted and used for this. And Ron, you actually have.
Yeah, it's like we had a program called Prepare to Prosper, but the training was called Camping Out at Home. Because again, we didn't want to use the scare tactics. We wanted to make it something that's more associable to people with disabilities and access function needs. And so when we were approached with this, we're like, well, we can incorporate some of this. And so we had a nice backing of what we were going to be doing. And then we both pretty much covered points on agency emergency preparedness, personal emergency preparedness. And then Lars Eric, I know that you're well known for the ICS training that we've always done in the community.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics. And by the way, in the slide, AEP is Agency Emergency Preparedness, and P is Personal Emergency Preparedness. I was going to pop those acronyms in the chat, but you know, I'm just going to verbally do it. I was also experimenting at the time this first happened back in 2019 with mind maps. And when I took that list of topics, I basically played with the mind mapping it because I saw where things overlapped. And that's where Ron and I came up with this idea of circle of preparedness, ever expanding circles, where you start with being prepared for yourself. And then those circles actually expand outward. We also realized that a lot of the freestanding classes that they were sort of recommending, a lot of them required a discussion of topics already covered. And by already mapping things, you didn't essentially have to repeat yourself. That actually led to these summits that we did. That was going to be one in Alameda County and one in Contra Costa, thereby covering the East Hub. And the topics, frankly, are pretty general. So what's good for Alameda is good for Contra Costa, is good for almost anywhere, with the exception of the government community-based organization panel. That one needs to obviously be very local. But that basically then led to the idea of us doing these panels. Just to kind of hammer this point a bit home, go ahead and next slide. We just really wanted to see, we saw an opportunity to make connections for topics that are normally isolated, and we wanted to basically have those connections be made. And that was kind of the idea behind all of this.
And really quick too, it's like
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
with these connections, what we found out is that most of the time community members, when they take these courses and they see, agency preparedness and ICS, they might not want to take this. But when we started building it all together, they started to see, oh, there is a connection that I can get into, because we expanded on agency preparedness. For example, agency is just not a nonprofit or a CBO or center-based organization or a faith-based organization. It could be your family, it could be your neighbor, whatever, a group of people. So for us, it was really making those connections and expanding that for people that might not be wanting to take the next level courses.
That's actually a really good point, Ron. A lot of times people come to these trainings with the idea of like, oh, that sounds like too much for me. And lo and behold, they actually find it super, super interesting. Now, I'm not going to subject you too much to the detail of this, but this is what my mind map looked like when I took the different points they had. And as you can see, there's certain points we had to cover for personal preparedness. If you've ever taught that, I'm sure you've covered these points. But you can see connections to points about agency preparedness. And then you can see connections to things that you would do with the incident command system, which, by the way, is one of my favorite topics to teach, because I have a really cool approach that I use for that. And that whole thing connected to how you'd be able to work more effectively, partnering between community-based organizations and government partners. So anyway, with all these connections happening, you kind of start to see how all these pieces can fit together like a nice puzzle. And go ahead and click. And that actually is another way we can think about this, like the geometry of preparedness. Now, we're not going to do that today, but both Ron and I like to dabble in magic. And this was actually, yeah, so I mean, how many personal preparedness trainings involve people doing magic tricks? Well, ours does. The magic of preparedness, right? So I'll kind of let you talk about this aspect of it, Ron.
No, it's like, what I love about the linking rings is many times, even when I'm doing the demonstration, people are banging the rings together. They're trying to get, how does this connect with what? And the way we designed it was we built these trainings to build upon each other. For example, everybody loves doing personal preparedness. It's a one-on-one, type course. And then you have agency preparedness. And it's now you're dealing with a group of people. But then when we looked at ICS, that's the communication. That's how we link. That's how we started linking community, agencies, and government together. And so as it grew, I mean, it actually took a life of its own, and people are starting, hey, we get this now. It's actually a nice flow on how you do it, instead of just having, a separate course. And that's one thing that we looked at when we first started doing this, is that even at some of the hubs, when they were doing the courseworks, they found out that, yeah, we had a lot of people for personal preparedness, but then we had very, very little for agency. We had very, very little enrollment for ICS. What's going on? Meanwhile, our program, we made it like a college course and it was every time, every hour, or not every hour, but every week, every day of the week, we had the same thing. So it made it very, very flowing for a lot of folks. And this is how we did the interlinking links of these trainings. Personal preparedness in the middle, all the way out to government and CBOs.
And actually, if you don't mind going back to that logo real quickly. Thanks. Cool. So it's kind of nice because you see how all these separate topics actually kind of like merge and join each other. But then the next slide right after this one, that's the slide that basically became our logo from the very beginning. Thank you very much. And I always like to expand it. It's like ever expanding circles, like you take care of yourself, and then it goes a little wider and it goes a little wider. And then sometimes we would actually draw other classes connecting to those various circles. So thank you. Now, the core of this, I'm not going to spend too much time at this point talking about the core of this was the curriculum. Even the curriculum that you were using, Ron, from Krill, it has roots in CARD. And the main thing that was really important is that you want to make sure this is by, for, and with. So this kind of very much ties into the motto for the disabilities movement, nothing about us without us.
Right.
Right. So the lessons are making sure that it's actually done in a positive way. So our mottos were prepare to prosper. Don't prepare for bad things, prepare to be brilliant. In fact, I always like every day your brilliance is disaster resilience. And we actually saw countless examples of that during. And I'm just, like I said, this is a curriculum I've been using for Eden I&R. It just ties in very nicely. So cool. So let's go ahead and click on the next. So just again, we're trying to weave things together. That's another analogy for it. And the thing that we always try to stress also is we can pivot and adapt. So we have some examples of that, right, Ron?
Oh yeah, to talk about COVID. We had to do a quick adaptation for that.
But even during the series, we'd find at the beginning, it would kind of depend on who the students were. We'd find out who the students were at the beginning and then realize we had to make some adjustments to things. So, and this is kind of like a simpler version. The idea, the oxygen mask analogy, right? They always tell you to put your own oxygen mask on first, and then you'll be able to take care of others. And that's actually how those circles expand. You got your oxygen mask on, and then you can do agency, then you've got tools that you can use, then you've got partners that you can work with. So anyway, here's what we've done. So basically, we've done this for 4 years now. Back in 2019, we did this in the form of 2 all-day summits. Then in 2020, we did twice a week late afternoon sessions. In 2021, we did like brown bag sessions, brown bag trainings. That's a model we've seen before. And then most recently in 2022, we did early evening sessions, kind of following the CERT model, if you will. So let's go into some details, different cadence and different rhythms. So the preparedness summits. First year on this project, we weren't calling it Prepare You yet. We were calling it Preparedness Summits. And we did 2 of them for both counties in the East Hub, one in Alameda County and one in Contra, Costa. And basically, go ahead. These are the flyers for those 2 summits. And you'll notice that they're very, very similar. The same logos, very much the same topics. In fact, it was basically, click, same bat times, same bat format. You can tell I was having fun on the slide here, right? Different dates, December 2nd and January 30th, 2020. And it was in neighboring bat counties. And by the way, we would want to do a very big thank you to Contra Costa VOAD for their partnership, because ALCO VOAD was kind of running the show here. Oh, I'm glad you like that. Thank you for the reaction. I appreciate that. And it was basically, I just kind of like that. It was a phrase we kind of kept using, same bat time, same bat format. That became a theme throughout this. So these are like 2 all-day summits that worked out really well. And the reaction from folks after these was, you know what? I've done these classes before, but there were connections made I'd never seen before. And then getting the locations is kind of fun, right, Ron? You were able to get the location for the first one for sure.
Right. It's like that was over at Regional Center of the East Bay over in San Leandro, Oakland area, which worked out great. I think for these trainings, we roughly had about 80 to 90 people at these trainings. And it was a full packed house, which was great. Yeah. But it was a full day. And again, there were other hubs doing some things differently. We didn't want to have people coming back on a daily basis that for this type of training. We decided just to go with a full day and see how they worked. And it seemed to work okay.
Seemed to work very okay. It was an interesting experiment. Some people were skeptical at first. Even we had our doubts originally. I was really happy with how that went. Anyway, you notice that the one in Concord was in January of 2020. And then I remember Ron and I attended this in February, this big Listos, California for All. And I'm holding up the camera. I hold the camera, my Listos mask. Listos is a Spanish word for ready. And then lo and behold, in March, I was at the EOC on a daily basis, Emergency Operations Center, for COVID. So that basically required a shift. It's like, okay, we're still going to do these trainings, but how are we going to do these trainings? An all-day summit on Zoom? That sounds kind of painful. So we had a colleague, her name was, oh, good Lord, I'm spacing the name, Ron. Catherine. She was taking twice a week language classes. So she had the idea of, why don't you just basically have this at a regularly scheduled time so people know when it is, just like a regular class. And then we kind of wrestled the name a bit, right?
Right. We were looking at prepare university.
Yeah.
But then it was kind of like, we're really not a university. We can't really call ourselves that, and we're not accredited. But then Allison, the executive director over at Eden I&R, said, why don't you just call yourselves Prepare You? And we're like, duh, that makes sense. We
It's a
like
brilliant idea. It just, I mean, it's just, you know, I'm a very punny guy. I like puns and jokes. So that was just kind of too appropriate for us, you know? So basically what we did was it was 7 weeks. It started in late August and ran through September, October. It was 14 sessions, each session an hour and a half for twice a week. And by the way, you know, in 2019, we used our own formats for PEP, personal preparedness. We actually had shifted because Ron and I were doing this already to using the Listos 4 steps to preparedness, which is kind of a format. Now, we were still plugging our own curriculum into that, but we're still plugging our own steps. Like for example, the Make a Kit was the very famous skip kit, safety kept in place training that I used to do, that I still do. But that's, you can kind of see how the whole thing kind of laid out.
Yeah, and notice the times on that first class. We actually went from 3:30 in the afternoon till 5. And so again, we were still in the testing phases, seeing which was going to be working. When we had talked about it beforehand of, you know, what would bring in the most people. So, and just know this, it's like, this is almost like when you're first doing this, if you decide to do this, you're going to try to build it, you know, to the best that you're thinking it's going to work. But think of it like a Windows 2.0. There's going to be a Windows 3.0. You're always going to be improving on it as you go along.
That's a great way to put it, actually. Yeah, it's going to be like your beta testing for things. So
Yeah.
Cool. Now, back in 2021, that's going to be the next year we did this. We decided to adapt and expand a little bit. We decided to be a little more concise by only having 1 hour sessions. And just like what you just basically said, Ron, we're trying to see what was a good time. The late afternoons worked out pretty well. We had good attendance. But we actually decided to try doing what I heard referred to as brown bag university, which is basically kind of like over lunch, have a quick training session. So that's what we also did. I'm going to get some detail, but we also did start doing for the first time something called Postgraduate Prepare You. So the next slide shows the flyer and format for that. So notice it's very similar. It was also 7 weeks. This time we decided to align a bit more with National Preparedness Month, right? And it was basically 14 sessions just like before, but this time it was only an hour twice a week. So just a shorter number of overall hours, are kind of making like a little tighter and a little more concise, but very similar topics. We still started with those expanding circles of personal. We did a short break for access and functional needs. One interesting thing that happened this year was that each of the 4 hubs did a regional course where they did a regional topic. So for example, the prior year, we had somebody who talked about donations management for each of the hubs. We decided to save time by having her do for all 12 counties in one big training. Our big training, our contribution from the East Hub was access and functional needs. Who do we have for that?
I think, I don't know, who was that? Lars
We definitely
Eric?
had Vance.
What was that?
We definitely had Vance Taylor.
We definitely had Vance Taylor, but we also had Sheridan Nicolau from State Council on Development Disabilities, and also our FAST coordinator for Alameda County, Ariana. So yeah, and so it worked out really well that they came in and just shared from a local to a region area to a statewide area of how access and function needs was actually being delivered throughout California.
Awesome. So anyway, you'll also notice that we actually did these pop-up sessions. It's kind of nice, as in addition to the 7 weeks, we were seeing interest in specific and timely topics. One topic that came up, it was actually something being promoted by the Reeve Foundation on preparedness for those with paralysis and mobility impairment. And the second one was actually for the National Association of Mental Illness, often goes by NAMI, on emotional preparedness.
Yeah, and just remember too, during that time, we had just pretty much for a year, we've been in COVID. So there was a lot of isolation, and we figured, you know, I know that NAMI had done a lot of wildfire mental health support for the people up in Paradise. And when they rolled out with this, I'm like, this could be totally up our alley as far as Prepare You postgraduate class.
Mhm.
Lars Eric, we not only had it once, we had it how many times?
Well, actually, if you click on the next slide, first off, the it's going to come up in just a second. The paralysis one was actually on purpose offered the same thing, the same topic, but we offered it twice in 2 sessions, both times from noon to 1 for an hour. So just the same bat time, if you will, but on 2 days in the same week. That was just to basically give a bit of different coverage. So that was one approach, is you can teach the same thing on different days to catch people who can't attend one or the other. And then for the NAMI, that's the next slide. We initially only planned on doing it once, but it was so popular we did it twice. The attendance was off the charts for that. So we did it once in December and once in March of 2022. And that was actually focused a lot of, I mean, that's a topic that people had always paid attention to. But after a year or more of like COVID, people were like, yeah, I need this so badly. Super popular. What actually happened also was, because of the restrictions being opened up for outdoor events, we actually got to have a postgraduate parking lot graduation, because we could do things outdoors. And that was actually kind of nice, because we had accumulated some stuff, like with the Listos. Remember all the stuff we got from Listos, Ron?
Oh yeah, I remember. It's like we were able to actually give everybody who attended our courses, we were able to give out these things. And from water bottles to the Listos bags, you name it, they were able to get ready. And you know, the most interesting thing is, this is only a very, very small portion of the attendees of our training. When we were doing this virtually, we not only had people from Alameda County and Contra Costa County, but we had them from Southern California that I had worked with before, and they were all coming in from all parts of California. So that's one thing we found out, was that, hey, virtual doesn't mean you have to stay in your own lane, in your own area. The programs, the only problem was with the government CBOs, because that was more tailored to the Alameda County and Contra Costa areas, but they would still be able to attend to see how we made those connections.
So if you click on the next slide, I actually have like a little slideshow that's going to actually show some of the photos of that day. So go ahead. There'll be some nice, pretty background music, I think. Or maybe not. Okay. Nope. Okay, the background music's not playing, which is okay.
You know, you can always sing.
Go ahead.
You can sing. Oh, there you go.
Oh, I can see. Oh, there we go. There's the music. Darn it, I meant to answer that in the chat, so I'll answer that in just a second. So if you Google Listos California for All, or go to listoscalifornia.org, that'll take you to the website that the state set up, because that was actually a state program. And that's how you get your hands on Listos publications. By the way, did you notice, Ron, there was not just Listos stuff that we gave people?
Oh yeah, there was Eden I&R stuff.
There was Stop the Bleed stuff.
Oh yeah.
And there was also a shakeout or two. So cool things. So in 2022, there was a little bit of a shift in how things went. We kind of went for a fewer number of sessions, but doing it longer, because that year had a directive to kind of look into covering organizations that were like CERT, even though not specifically CERT. And we're trying to basically make sure that the definition of agency got really kind of broadened. And Ron, you got a lot of experience with City of Hayward CERT, for example. That's your...
Well, the interesting thing about agency, it's I just want to touch on that really quick, is that agency does not have to be, again, a nonprofit or a faith-based. It can be anything you define it as. It could be a family. It's a group of people working together. And so when we kind of pulled agency training apart, we opened it up so anybody can actually benefit from that training. And then even with CERT, the one thing I love about CERT is that you get the training, but many of you know that it's a train and release kind of a training. And this is one thing that we also wanted to shift on for Prepare You, is to build that culture of preparedness. It's not a one-time shot, you're done, we're going to let you go. That's one of the reasons why we came up with, we can do a post-grad class and actually try to keep people informed. And what we found out too is that a lot of folks, they've taken our classes before, but they're returning. They for some reason that they like the training, which is great. We love them, and I know that some of the people here that Heather, I know you're here. It's great that you always help and support us, even getting this word out to folks, because it is a great base course for a lot of the community members.
And as you can see here from the flyer, it was still 7 sessions, but this time it was once per week, 2 hours. Some of the specialized topics like, volunteer donations management didn't necessarily happen this time around, but we still focused on those core topics of the ever-expanding circles, the personal agency, but using a much broader definition, incident command system, continuity of operations. One of the things that came up this topic was there's a group in the city of Berkeley that calls themselves, hang on one second, VP, the Berkeley Disaster Preparedness Neighborhood Network, or BDPNN. I'd be normally popping that in chat right now if I could. But they are not completely unlike CERT, but they're still different. And one important thing is they're not really aligned with any specific government agency, because they're just not as comfortable with that. So you're kind of trying to find comfort level. So I think the main point here is things can be really, really adaptable, and definitions can be shifted on an as-need basis. So that's a cool thing. We also had, for our postgraduate Prepare You, Ron and I both got certified in the topic I'm very interested in, which was, and I'm holding the binder up that we had for this, it was targeted violence, it was basically about prevention rather than reaction. So targeted violence prevention programs, we both got certified in that. And we basically offered that on an as is. And that was basically, that's long enough that we did that in part 1 and part 2 over 2 consecutive nights. So still in the evening, but that, unlike the Reeve, which was 2 independent, this was, you should attend both parts, because some trainings are like that. It was kind of a deep, sort of a heavy topic. So just to give a sense of what we covered, I just kind of sort of do a little bit of raindrop. This is kind of like a quick list I did of all the topics that we had covered in the core, the main Prepare You sessions, not necessarily the specialized pop-up Prepare Yous, which we also covered as well. So things like your name here, expanding the agency, access function needs preparedness. I mean, it was quite a lot that we actually covered over that time. And yet it was still kind of in bite-sized pieces. And as you see on the next, we always kind of centered around the core topics. Even after we kind of moved away from that original definition, it was still personal, agency, ICS, continuity of operation, and the panels. But then we also had the special topics, which is on the next slide. Oh yeah, and there's a circle, of course. The circle is those core. Things like volunteer management. We actually had some people who are actual ALCO VOAD members who were able to offer this on the general agency and faith-based perspective. So that was because we're chair and co-chair of ALCO VOAD. We were able to get of some folks that we had in the membership offer those classes as guest instructors. And who we get for donations management?
Oh God, Charlene Sargent.
And where did we see her first time?
Over at Contra Costa County VOAD.
Exactly. So we actually got to have that. And building a culture of preparedness for your agency, the former executive director of collaborating agencies responding to disasters, did that presentation. And we had a fantastic panel for the Your Name Here. So basically, it's not just me and Ron, is what we're saying. I mean, we had those core things, but we had a lot of, guest instructors. Also, the mental health, emotional self-care was a guest instructor with NAMI. Like I said, we did the targeted violence. One of our students, that was an interesting one, right, Ron? The tornado?
Oh yeah, that's an incredible, just to listen to how she actually explained that going into a tornado shelter, you would think it's big, it's tiny. And she took pictures and shared that with us. And here's the beautiful part. Lars Eric and I are not the know-it-alls on this one at all. And the beautiful thing about Prepare You is even in the after the training, we actually give 15 minutes to a half an hour more time, where if people want to discuss or share, it's a nice part about the training itself. It doesn't stop. And that's part about building that culture of preparedness. It's like, we're still there. And, that's how we found out about the trainer from NAMI. And, she was on the last part, and we were talking, and I'm like, this would be great for a training. But there's so many people. And then we found out too about winter driving, somebody that we had connected with. It never happened. I wish it would have, because we've had those storms. But it was a beautiful thing just to have those connections happen after the training itself.
Mm-hmm. So for the future, which I think this is going to end up kind of addressing one of the questions I see in the Q&A, we are hoping for the future to be a hybrid training at an actual school, perhaps, or an actual university. Somebody with East Bay, Cal State East Bay, for example, actually already approached me at a meeting I was at about, hey, you guys want a classroom? We are pretty committed to making sure these things are hybrid, because as you pointed out, Ron, we had people attend from where?
Southern California. Oh, as we've had actually people from all the way across the country.
Yeah.
New York, Boston, Florida, they were coming in. So it was kind of unique.
In fact, one of the other hubs was actually finding they didn't have enough capacity to do some of the personal preparedness. We actually had a third of one of our classes ended up being about, we ended up having like a third of the people were from San Francisco.
Right.
So we're also kind of thinking of, like, in the future, like some folks were like, okay, we're not an organization at all. So I would do a Prepare You that focuses more on neighborhoods and individuals. You could shift this as a way of getting involved small business preparedness. I think the core of this would still work out. You could do additional focus on various aspects of access and functional needs. One of the things we did for VOAD for a long time back was actually on run, hide, fight from an AFN perspective, for example. I also want to kind of just touch on how we present this. And just keep in mind, this is just a few thoughts about the pedagogy. And the reason I brought this up is because this kind of came up recently with a colleague of mine after a training I did in-house. Do keep in mind that this is a document that I can share. It's CARD's Community Educator Best Practices, which very much focuses on being interactive and engaged. And I just want to preface this very quick discussion of, be like Bruce Lee. Absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely your own. I always like that quote. So, next slide. The CARD's Prepare to Prosper model, and this is a lot that we did. I really think that the fact that a key to this was not just the format, but also the framing and the way of doing this, which is basically focused on being very interactive. In fact, I think, Ron, like you said, we're not the know-it-alls. A lot of the reason we had a lot of guest instructors and students guest instructing is because you and I both facilitate rather than lecture, right?
Right. That's so true. It's like, and again, every one of you here, we have 119 folks. You've got some expertise that we don't know about, in areas that we don't know about, and we love to get that out to the rest of the community.
Excellent. And next slide. So basically, when you get these slides, here's the key points. And like I said, I can share these documents, but it's a lot of this about like active engagement, making sure you're tailoring specifically for your audience, making sure you're giving immediate benefits. When people leave your training, have they already filled something out? Have they already programmed their cell phone? Make sure you're filling a gap, acknowledging the history experiences of your community, the community you're training. So a lot of times when I do a training, I always have what I call a pre-interview.
And for me, it's like, we really focus on action. It's like, just don't leave the course. Oh, this is great. We love it. And, one of the nicest compliments I've heard was, we loved your show.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this wasn't a show, guys. And yeah, again, we really want to impress upon people. It's about the action. It's about the doing part of it, not just listening.
Mm-hmm. And this is just an example of one of those key points. This is actually an example from the booklet. Making sure that you're asking questions, even easy closed questions. So when Ron and I do the Listos California 4 steps, the first step is find your 5 trusted allies. And how do you handle that one?
Well, there's a couple of things. It's like the first thing I do is play a game.
Mm-hmm.
I love games. That game, for many of you who've been on it, is called Name That Tune. And the tune I play is from Friends. I'll be there for you.
I'll be there for you. Yep.
Thank you for singing that. But then after that, it's like I give them a challenge for 1 minute. What they do, I tell everybody, grab your pen and pencil for 1 minute. I want you to write down every single name that you have. And that's a starting spot for them to call to find out who's going to be their trusted allies. But Lars Eric, I know you do it differently. You do it in a team approach.
Well, it depends on who I've got. Like sometimes I'll actually have people, if they don't have pens and papers, then I'll have them spend 30 seconds. Person A talks to B, all the names they can recite. And then the next 30 seconds, they reverse roles.
Exactly.
I've been doing some trainings where they don't have pen and paper, although the pen and paper is preferable because they get that tangible benefit. Then later on, and that's that's kind of a very easy ask, because then you just ask them, how many did you get?
Yeah.
Then later on, I do the more elaborate, safety kept in place MacGyver game.
Right.
Which is much of a slightly more, but doing games and questions, is part of this model of facilitating, acknowledging, clarifying, and enhancing. That's actually part of the practice, always having that kind of a constant loop where you're always doing that. Anyway, I think we ran a tiny bit over, but not too bad. But in closing, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. It's
and I do want to mention one thing too. It's we are going to be doing an in-person training. It's going to be in June for the National CERT conference over in South San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
So if you guys are CERT members or you're connected with CERT, you'd like to get yourself up to the national conference, we'd love to see you there. We've got, I believe it's a day and a half, right?
Yeah.
That we're doing this.
Actually, it's basically 2 days. It's actually basically 2 days. There's day 1, we're covering 2 topics, and day 2, we're covering 2 other topics.
That's it. And we'd love to see you guys there.
Yep.
Thank you. And this is our contact information.
Yep.
Again, if you'd like to give us a email or just contact us, we'd love to hear it. And I know that in the questions, it's like, are we able to do this to, give this training out? Lars Eric and I can do this training. We'd love to do it.
And we can basically give you some nice, like I said, I'm going to basically make sure I share with Mark and everybody the booklets I was talking about, so you guys can kind of see a little bit about the approach. But anyway, should we cover some Q&A? What's the timing, Mark? How do you want to handle? Oh, thank you for the claps and everything.
Yes, we appreciate that.
Okay, Sharon, we do have some questions in the Q&A, if you could facilitate that.
Sure. Dan Coleman asked, your training is free?
Yes.
Yes, because of the Bay Area funding and because of the funding I get from Walter and Elise Hawes, this is what I'm supposed to be doing for Eden I&R anyway. Our training is definitely free. It's because we're funded to do these kinds of trainings. And your funding, Ron, is because you're with the
I'm with the Independent Living Centers, but we're also funded through I'm funded through PG&E, support people with power outages and such. So they fund me.
Tim asked, how is earthquake preparedness folded into the training?
When and as needed. I've always preferred to take a all hazards whole community approach to my trainings. So like I just recently did a senior center where I said, if you guys want to talk about anything specific, just let me know. But otherwise, we're going to be doing something that should allow you to handle any kind of disaster, because we live in California, the Disneyland of disasters. That being said, 2 of the folks I actually also then covered, earthquake preparedness for seniors. So you can fold in any topic specifically as needed. The tornado is a fun example. We don't get tornadoes in California very often, not until recently anyway. But it was really interesting. It's actually really interesting to hear a specific, topic covered.
Lori asked, what is the link to the conference, please?
Oh,
Ooh, good question.
That is a good question.
Yeah, the National CERT Conference.
Yeah, gonna look that up.
I'll try to see if I can look that up and share that. But if not, I'll share that afterwards. But
Yeah.
if you Google National CERT Conference, it's being held in San Francisco this year in June.
Yes, it is.
Tim asked, can the opening session be done in person with Zoom follow-ups?
I think, what do you think, Ron? What do you want to say about that?
You know, I think definitely that's a possibility. I was just wondering about ongoing participation in it. It's like, yes, we can do an in-person and then you're talking about Zoom follow-ups afterwards. I just wanted to find out how many people would drop out and not participate in Zoom. I would be willing to do it. It'd be kind of fun.
I'd be willing to do it too, but I think I'm really kind of committed because you talked about this with our VOAD meetings as well. We're kind of committed to having things be hybrid for accessibility reasons.
Yes.
Making sure that we can actually include as much of the community as possible. And sometimes it just helps because you don't have to drive so far, right? I mean, it really kind of opens up the audience to broader experiences. But yeah, I mean, I think part of the thing I noticed as you put this together is that Prepare You and this model of having like trainings that happen, like link things, it was longer, it was shorter, it was noon, it was evenings, it was weekly, it was all day. You can make this flex in almost any way. Oh, and Dan Coleman beat me to it. I just found the link to the National CERT Conference, but it's already in the Q&A. Thank you for that.
Danielle asked, do you ever come to Southern California for training?
Ooh,
Personally, I don't, but I have worked with people down in the Southern California area where they've done some trainings with me before, but I would be open to it. I don't want to say I would never do that. That's always a possibility. And we can definitely do Zoom trainings for Southern California.
I could definitely do Zoom. Somebody would have to cover my travel costs in order to get me to be able to come down otherwise. So
Marlene asked, how do we find out when you are offering the hybrid training?
Send an email to us and ask to be on our mailing list so I can put you there.
Yeah, because we don't even know yet. It's like we're still planning that out. And then one thing I do want to mention too, it's like out of the trainings we've done, the in-person, the brown bag, the evening, the afternoon, it's interesting to find out our numbers, attendance numbers. And for our 1 hour of power, the noontime, 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, that had the most attendees come. As a matter of fact, we had 191 folks attending those trainings. But during the evening time, I believe we had the most in one class show up. That was 97, right?
That's right.
Okay.
No, actually, it was 111.
111, sorry, yeah.
Actually, 111 for that one class, yeah. I think partially that's because San Francisco was attending a lot of those.
Exactly.
When is your session at the National CERT Conference?
We're pre-conference. So I believe it's the 25th.
I'm bringing my calendar up right now. Hold
That's
on.
what I'm going to do too.
Yeah. April, May, June.
You got it.
I believe where the 26th is one day and the 28th is another day. So it's not consecutive days.
Yeah.
So the 26th and the 28th of June. There's lots of other good stuff being covered as well, of course.
I am in LA County. Who do I reach out to for local assistance of similar organizations?
For LA County, it's like you might want to look at the independent living centers down in your area, depending on where you're at in LA. I know they've got Cal Life. They've got Skill down there. And I'm sorry for the acronyms. That's California. Just look up independent living centers and it will tell you which ones that are there. And they don't have a Prepare You, but they do have courses and trainings in that area.
And then if you're trying to basically look, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I don't know about 211s in that area.
That's pretty easy to find though. If you guys just go to 211.org, you can find who's there. And I can also be an EE introducer. I was also going to say, check with your local VOADs or VOAD-like organizations.
Definitely.
Phyllis asked, we are an FQHC health center. We are looking specifically for ICS training for our ICS team.
And I'm going to actually, I was about to answer that online, but basically drop a line my way, email me, for example. If you guys are like in Alameda County, I can travel and do it live. If you guys aren't, we could talk about doing it Zoom. But I would also talk about the approach I do to ICS to see if it meets your needs. Because what I do for ICS is not FEMA. It's deliberately not FEMA. It's ICS for community responders. It's incident command system as a project management tool for anything. Oh, and by the way, it's also good for disasters.
That's what I love. It's like you can do it as a fundraising,
Yeah.
grant writing.
Because in order to have a nonprofit be able to devote a longish period of time on something that's only about disasters, when that's not their primary mission, that's a harder sell. But ICS has been used to actually apply for a grant, to actually get money. Well, a nonprofit can pretty easily justify devoting time to learning a system that helps your agency get money. So
I love what Bridget said. ICS is good for weddings too.
yep, that's a famous example.
Yes, it is. I love it.
All right, Lars and Ron, thank you so much. I just want to point out that there is a link on the screen of the survey, but it will pop up, or it's supposed to at least, as you leave the webinar. And there will be a reminder email about it sent to you tomorrow. And thank you for joining us. Crisanta, do you have any final comments as the chair of our public sector committee?
Yeah, I just wanted to also thank Lars Eric and Ron. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a great presentation. Everybody enjoyed it. Lots of great questions. Thanks everybody for the wonderful questions. We love it when you guys ask these questions and engage with our presenters. Again, please go to the website and take a look at our other webinars if you have not already done so. And stay tuned for our next topic. So thank you all for joining us, and stay tuned. We're going to bring you more great topics. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, guys. Thank you.